Well, good morning. We're going to talk about paper, a riveting topic. Paper is not dead. Paper is money. Paper is important. It's a big piece of what we all do in this room. I am Bill Rojack. I work for Midland Paper Company here in New York. The fellow panelists here are to my immediate right. Go ahead, test your mic.
Test, test. I'm Dave Elovich. I work for Rolland Paper. We're a Canadian paper mill out of Quebec, Canada. And we're a little bit unique in that we make only recycled, uncoated papers.
I'm Jeff Hansen. I'm the CEO of Horizon Paper. We've been suppliers to the book market for over 42 years. We're based in Stamford. And I've been here for 28 years doing this.
All right. So just to be clear, Dave's the guy who makes the paper, right? He works for the paper mill. Jeff and I are guys who distribute or sell the paper to the marketplace, however we do that. So we've got some slides prepared for you. We're going to go through the market overview right now. For those of you who are real close into the market, I apologize if you already know some or most of this. For those of you who don't know the paper market that well, there's a lot to it. So we're going to lead with, I think, Jeff, this is you, yes?
Yeah, so the paper market is based upon supply and demand. Paper has been treated as a commodity for a long time, even though it's a manufactured product. So most of what happens in regard to pricing happens with supply and demand. And over time, as you may know, demand has shrunk in regard to a lot of categories. So pricing is stable, or if it's going to ever go up, it's because supply has gone down. And as we talk about each grade in the book market, it's important to really discuss what happened in 2018 as the mills were pushed and had issues with profitability. We lost some mills, some paper machines were shut down, and it was a rare time where every category had price increases. And it was a chance for the mills to make money again, and I think because of some overzealousness, there was some reverb back in 2019 with a big drop in demand. It hurt categories like retail that do use uncoated groundwood, and it kind of filters into other products. So, you know, where does that leave us now? So we went from some really high numbers, and we've had the prices come down. In regard to uncoated groundwood, which is heavily the product that's used in the book side, there's brightnesses from 57 for bulky news all the way up to 92 bright. And that flexibility of manufacturing many different grades means the machines, there's only so much softness, but part of it is there's also export. And the strength of the dollar can affect that as well. So export has been kind of weak, so there's enough supply that prices have come down a bit, and this looks like a fairly stable year after the price decreases. Book grades always provide higher value for the mills, and they're always going to want that business. So there's always a certain amount of competitiveness because the book grades are high value. Regard to uncoated free sheet, we've also seen some changes here. Things softened up. We lost some mills. Some mills have come back that made it. Coated mills will lift their coaters and make uncoated free sheet, which creates additional supply. There's a fair amount of import of uncoated free sheet. So commodity offset is a grade that the prices have softened, and there's a lot of availability. On the flip side, free sheet trade book, there's very few producers. It's a very stable grade. The pricing really hasn't changed, and it's a higher priced product. And you're really not going to see much in regard to changes on the pricing of free sheet trade book. And then coated free sheet, as I said, about sometimes they lift their coaters. It's a smaller market. When they lift their coaters, it fills up the machines. So even though there's been a decrease in demand and a small decrease in price, things are kind of pretty much stable, and that's because they have the flexibility to make coated or uncoated paper. And with the exchange rates, the US dollar strong, there is some availability from overseas. Now, things changed quickly. When we first putting this together, the Canadian dollar had strengthened, and there's a lot of uncoated paper that comes from Canada, so we do care about the exchange rates. So a few weeks ago, the Canadian dollar was getting stronger. There's predictions that it would continue to strengthen. It's already collapsed, I'd say, to a degree. and now it's outlook is that it's going to be fairly low for the rest of the year, so that should help stabilize pricing. Tariffs, they were increased for China to 15% December 15th, but there's a Valentine's present from the administration to drop them to 7.5% on Friday. And supply is not really an issue to get you paper on time. I say the one time there's always a problem is when there's a unique roll size that's chosen. I've seen it many times where there's something chosen for the book to be a certain size, and then all of a sudden it takes off, and there's reprints needed, and that's not a standard size that's been stocked or made, and everyone is afraid to order too much of it because if the book stops selling, then you're stuck with a size that you don't use elsewhere. So I'd say that's the one thing to worry about. Otherwise, there's enough supply right now, and the only thing to worry about is if at some point, some mills can't make enough money to stay in business, then you've got an issue with supply. But this year, things should be in pretty good shape.
All right, so that's a real 40,000-foot view
Yes.
of what's happening in the paper market as far as macro items. Dave's going to talk specifically now about book paper and some of the drivers that we need to pay attention to for the publishers and some of the paper buyers for the book manufacturers in the room for selecting paper for your next book, okay?
Thank you.
So many of you who are experienced in book production know a lot of these features or categories, coded versus uncoated, whether you're doing any four-color process or if it's just black ink. Color, white versus cream. I do have to add information. Cream is not made as often as it used to be. So a cream-colored paper in many mills are made on a certain cycle. You think about it, it's a big pancake batter. They only color the batter probably every 3 weeks in particular mills. So if you want the cream colored in certain grades, you have to plan accordingly, whereas white paper runs almost 75, 80% of the time. So colors are becoming a little more infrequent and should be considered important in your planning process. The other thing that I've noticed out in the marketplace, and I brought a couple samples, is the use of, or the key attribute of opacity. Now we're getting into these illustrated novels that you see. And this is a full coat of color on on many of the pages. So your normal book papers might not be able to accept that much ink and also have the opacity so that you don't see that ink showing through on the next pages. So now with the advent of these illustrated novels, your paper grade might have to be corrected or optimized for the amount of ink that you're putting on that paper. So that's why I brought up that opacity. Opaque has more opacity, offset has less opacity. Bulk is one of the key features that differentiates book paper from regular commercial or direct mail printing catalog papers, in that the size of the spine is critical because you're designing a spine based on the bulk of the book, the page count or the PPI of your book. So that's why I think most paper mills, they value, or the price of book paper stays at a specific value proposition, because we're manufacturing that paper to a bulk specification as opposed to a basis weight specification.
Which typically means you have to slow the paper machine down in order to do that, which adds cost. And that's why you'll find mills that make book paper are a little more specialized than just your plain old commodity stuff. Sorry to jump in.
And there are less book producers because of that, so.
Right, manufacturing to bulk versus basis weight. So,
Lean into the mic, Dave.
oh, sorry. Okay. Size and format, that's something that's pretty elemental as far as what size, and then that goes into the size of press that your particular printer is going to use, all those informations create the roll size or sheet size that is critical. And binding, end leaf, here's another illustrated novel that that was very popular last year. And the end leaf is colored and printed. So these are other different steps that are involved in book manufacturing that have to be considered, because this is a colored sheet of paper that is specialized versus the rest of the book.
And I hate to butt in again,
No,
sorry,
please.
but as it relates to end leaf, that's even more specialized than the text that you put in the book, right? So if end leaf fails, what happens to the text in your book, right? It falls out of your case, which is no good. That book is held together by the end leaf. It's glued onto the case by the end leaf. So end leaf is going to be expensive precisely because it can't fail. So your price points they're not arbitrary. They're there for a particular reason. I guess that's what I'm driving at.
Yeah, and there's a technical aspect of making end leaf paper because you have to have strength in both directions, the direction of the web and then the cross direction, so it doesn't fail on the fold. So that attributes to that. Then we talk about costs. Jeff alluded to free sheet versus groundwood. Groundwood tends to be on the lesser expensive price than a free sheet based on the production process in the pulping operation. And then we have the difference between a free sheet not yellowing, whereas a groundwood sheet over time will yellow or discolor. And that has to do, again, with the pulp making or the pulp manufacturing process of lignins and not having lignins into the paper. Another cost is virgin versus recycled. We've seen more publishers and authors going to more recycled paper. In our case, we offer mostly recycled papers for some of those publishers based on their book topics and their sensitivity to the environment.
And I'll butt in again. Sorry, I'm really good at that. As it relates to recycled versus virgin, it's not just as simple, guys, as I'm going to throw some recycled fiber into the sheet of paper, and therefore it's going to be recycled. A lot of the mills that we're talking about they're very linear. They have a pulping operation that runs directly into the paper machines that go right to big rolls of paper or sheets of paper. To disrupt that process and add another fiber into an already very efficient process, for those mills that are big white mills, it's a problem and it's expensive. It can be difficult. Plus, you can be adding some dirt content to it. You get certain mills like Rolland who are specialized at making recycled paper. That's what they do. So again, we're getting to, if you are asking for something different or more specific, it's probably going to cost you, or you're going to need to look for a specialized producer of this stuff.
Next slide.
Got it.
Oh, you got them. Next, we talk about sourcing. Where do we get our paper? So we manufacture the paper, and now we go through our supply chain. Our supply chain is through our merchant partners, our brokers that take the paper. We deliver it from the mill, either direct to the printer or to their warehouse facilities. In that case, the publisher negotiates paper contracts or needs through their merchant partner, and then that partner calls the paper mill and then checks on the availability of the paper based on size, basis weight, PPI, et cetera. And then we negotiate and put it in our schedule and get it out the door. The interesting process, though, is paper making is a continuous process. It just doesn't stop. Those paper machines continually run. They're either making specific roll sizes for a specific publisher or a book, or they're making inventory, stock sizes or stock roll sizes that go into a warehouse, but they don't stop. So it's a unique application of matching a publisher's need of what they need at that particular time with the schedule that's running on a continuous process machinery. So there's that compromise, that back and forth of when you need paper and when the mill is running that particular grade at that particular moment. That's why at the end, we talk about and we've talked mostly in this sessions about communicating your needs as far in advance as possible so that paper makers can understand your needs and be able to make your production schedule.
And Dave, as you know, many times because of that, we'll look for schedules and we'll make certain grades, ahead of time so that, they can be in a warehouse or at the printer, so when you have reprints, it's ready to go.
Good point. Many printers buy their own paper. Again, they work through their merchant partners. They buy paper either specifically for their publisher's book, or they buy it for their own standard inventory. If they have certain size presses, they buy the specific sizes for their particular presses, whether they're cut sheet for digital applications, folio for sheet fed, or the web rolls for their web presses. And then the last item is there has been some instances with many printers buying direct from paper mills. We're seeing less and less of that in today's market. We're seeing more of the merchant partner because of the scheduling and also scheduling from bringing paper, importing paper from other countries. The scheduling is critical for logistics when that paper arrives into port and gets through customs and then gets delivered to the printer. So the merchant has a more valuable contribution to make in that supply chain. I think I mentioned about our continuous process. Mills don't stock a lot of non-standard size rolls. We just don't have the space for it. And also it's a cash flow issue. So many specific size roll widths are made to order. We do have some standard size rolls that people keep on the floor, but many projects that you have with different trim sizes require a custom size roll. So that's something that has to be considered in planning your jobs. Many of the digital sizes have been standardized on, on some of the inkjet and inkjet webs and the Indigo toner-based machines. The 1319, 1913 sizes have been standardized, and many of the mills will keep those in stock, in inventory for quick deliveries. We talked about importing. Domestic is much shorter lead times, while importing takes a little bit longer to plan, especially when you're coming overseas on a ship. So those things have to be considered. And then Jeff mentioned about standard sizes. If you can standardize some of your format sizes, it's a big help in planning out future projects. Okay.
All right. Why don't you continue on this one, Dave? That's still you.
Okay. I think I've hit a lot of these things about common sizes, communications. We've heard that in the last session about communicating with your printer, about your needs, and moving as far back in the planning process so that your merchant knows to communicate to the paper mill what your needs are and production dates. The more you can communicate planning-wise, the better off you are. We also rather see annual contracts versus spot purchasing. Some publishers think, or printers think, they can buy things on a spot market, but with the variations in supply and demand, it's better off to have contractual relationships with a number of mills in specific product categories so people can prepare for your needs in an expeditious way, as opposed to just buying on what's available on that particular moment in the production process. So pre-planning removes a lot of the headaches that occur.
All right. So now I'll talk about trends. With that as your backdrop, you got the sort of how we go to market with paper. We got where the paper market is, where's it going, what's happening right now. It's not very different from a lot of the other things that have been said in this room. The Amazonification, I like that, I'm going to steal that word. The Amazonification of the business in general, and I'm talking about the media business that is ink on paper, it's creating a math issue, right? It's basic math. So it's dictating change, and that change for us is it's getting smaller. It's good in that there's less waste, right? But it's not so good in that it is causing sector declines, right? Mass market has gone over a cliff. It's continued to go over a cliff. It will go over a cliff, and that's tied to newsprint, right? You look at how many people are reading newspapers these days. It's fewer and fewer each day. Magazines, same thing. Higher ed right now has gone over a cliff as well. Well, it's the model that's changing, right? It's not just preferences, it's content delivery, and is there a better way for that content to be delivered, a more effective way for it to be delivered than just in paper? So for years I've been fielding questions. All right, Bill, you're 47 years old, you got 4 kids. What are you going to do for the rest of your career? Because paper is dead. Paper is not dead. I guarantee you it's not dead. All right, sure, there are more delivery methods. So we've got MOOCs now, we've got OERs, we've got ebooks, right? 10 years ago, the ebook was spelling my demise, right? My tombstone was already written. It was over. And right now, where are ebooks? What, 20%, roughly, maybe 18% of the market? And it's very defined by its sector. So adult fiction, romance, okay, predominantly ebook. But how about adult nonfiction? You don't see it. You just don't see it. So it's very specific. Now, is a children's book, is that better delivered as an ebook? It really depends upon what kind. But I love sitting on my kid's bed and reading Dr. Seuss with them. I just do. Right? Now, are there other educational things where you can read on an iPad and click on something and learn and go deeper? Absolutely. Anything that gets people reading from a paper guy's perspective, if it gets them reading, it's good for paper and it's good for this business. That's the way I look at it. So I'm not intimidated by that trend, right? Watching and listening. You're hearing about Audible. Listening is the new reading. Baloney. I get it, right? The trend's gone like this. But I'm not threatened by it. I just think it's another way to deliver media that's interesting and it's engaging. Okay, retail distribution change, really big deal. I mean, that's a huge deal. How stuff gets to people. And that's affecting all of us, the bookstores, the box stores. But what it's done is it's changed our model also. So instead of these I got a good feeling about this title going out there, we're printing too many of them, and then most of them come back to us in returns, that model's being changed. Well, that has a direct impact on the paper business, a direct one, right? So I wrote Amazon effect, but it should be Amazonification. So, all right, inefficiency focus, but now we're going to protectionism, right? That's directly related to distribution changes. So it's not just tariffs from finished products coming over from China or wherever it is. It's not just print tariffs that might be imposed somewhere else. It's actual paper tariffs. For those of you who aren't in the paper business, right now there are a bunch of paper mills, many around the world, that are being tariffed at 100% rates for dumping here in the United States, right? So you're not seeing any of their paper here, so it's a game, right? It's a trade war. It's a bottom line trade war. That has a huge impact on the paper business because sheets from Malaysia, right? You look at where the paper business is growing. Is it growing in the United States? Anybody think that there are new paper mills being built in the United States? No, it's not an emerging market. It's all overseas. Well, as they build those paper machines overseas, we're threatened by it here in the US. We throw tariffs on them for dumping here, so we don't see their paper here, right? So there is a game here. Big trend to humanity. And that's really in all of our businesses, but also in the paper business, right? The me and us piece of it. It's convenient. We need it to be convenient, right? We want to read chapters. We want clips. We want blurs. We want speed. We want our stuff in 2 days. Same thing with paper, right? All these model changes to POD means we need paper on the floor right now because the book's got to go out tonight. So it's a huge stress on us. We'll talk about the impact. What's the impact of paper? There's a big focus on this now, and there should be, right? Paper for a long time was paper manufacturing was a bad operator, right? We had fish with 3 heads, and we got bad names because all paper mills are on bodies of water. They need a lot of water to make paper, right? So paper gets this bad name, right? In the admissions world, in the water world. Paper making right now, never mind, we're killing trees, right? I can tell you 100%, I can tell you that in my 25 years of doing this, this business has gotten so clean compared to where it had been that I feel absolutely no shame in being in the paper business. In fact, I feel good about it. We're planting more trees than we're taking down every day, the whole paper business. And we're returning the water back to the rivers and the bodies of water cleaner than it ever was before. And our emissions are way down. Carbon's a big deal, right? But we're back. It's all part of the humanity piece of this. And it's not just certified fiber or recycled fiber where it comes from. It's about, are you displacing the indigenous people in those lands in order to harvest that fiber? It's a real humanity movement here, guys. And it comes all the way downstream to the lowly paper guys. So how we're going to talk about national pride. All right, we're back to the tariffs. I want to talk about National Sword. Anybody in the room know what National Sword is or was? No? All right, the National Sword, program was put in place by China a couple of years ago where they said, we don't want your garbage anymore, okay? So all of those recycling centers around here, we were gypping them. We were taking our recycled fiber and we were throwing cans and bottles and all of our garbage in there too. We were baling it up, putting it on containers, sending it over to China. They were buying our recycled fiber, but it was all garbage. Their yield was terrible. And finally, the focus comes on China for their environmental issues. And so now they said, whoa, we don't want your garbage. We don't want our garbage either. But it's had a major impact now on the paper business. What are we going to do with this stuff? And that's where mills like Rolland are really interesting. They're 100% powered by the methane gas that comes out of a landfill that goes into their paper-making facility. It's fascinating. There's a lot of science that goes into this and a lot of potential upside. But I ask you, as the consumer community, please, Rich, you said something earlier about communicating. Please communicate with us. If something's valuable to you as a publisher or as a printer, bring it to us. Let's talk about it. Let's put it out there, whether it's recycled fiber, whether it's certified fiber, whether it's deforestation or any of the rest of that. These are important topics. All right, literacy and retention. Haptics is a really cool thing, and I credit one of the paper mills, Sappi Paper, did a study called, it's called Haptics, but haptics is the science of touch. Right? It's about how we learn, and it's about memory retention on how we learn. And the fact is, the science has come out to say that we, humans, all of us, learn better when we can touch it, when we can smell it, when we can write it, scribble on it. We don't retain it the same way when there's not that experience. And that's back to the humanity piece of this. Never mention that we're screen fatigued and we're screen addicted. I've got 4 children, and I can tell you I fight that every single day. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. Trends in paper innovation. This self-publishing market, BISG has told you, but depending upon whose math you believe, 400,000 to 1 million new titles every year. Tell me a market that's going away that produces 400,000 to 1 million new things every year, right? It's crazy. It's growing hand over fist. So we have to try and keep up with that as paper people. POD comes right to it. The pressure on the paper business to keep up with POD has been transformative for our business. And there's too many different ways to talk about. But you guys should know that when you look to put a rough front edge on your book, you're potentially causing a downstream pressure for the paper companies because we have to make it differently. we have to trim it differently. We can't have a stencil on the end of our rolls, or else you'll see it on the foredge of your book because it's not trimmed. Little tiny things like that. All right. The macro trend is kind of like all the rest of this: smaller supply base, more specialized products, sustainably made from everywhere, but it has to act like it's from here. And that's it. I'm passionate about paper. Sorry.
Very good.
Thank you.
You're
Any,
welcome.
any questions for the paper guys? Yeah, oh, couple here. Go ahead.
If a paper is technically FSC or SFI certified, is it true that a book cannot have that logo if the print facility is not certified by that group or the entire supply chain? And as a publisher or a printer, should we be removing that logo in the new global printing landscape?
Well, I mean, it's true, it does have to be, the whole supply chain has to retain certification level, so it can be on the book, and it shouldn't be on the book if it's not certified throughout.
So it's a chain of custody. Every touch in that chain of custody has got to be certified, or else, technically speaking, according to the standard, you cannot put the logo on the finished product. So that's that. If you can ensure with chain of custody, which is a very specific process, if you can ensure that, then logo away.
But you bring up a good point. Why should the printer, at the end of the chain, be responsible when it's really the sourcing of the fiber, whether it's wood or recycled fiber, is the real responsibility?
Right.
So having the last person at the end of the chain pay the money as well as everybody else, I think sometimes is considered unfair. So.
What's the new environmental focus that's going to be coming down the pike? First it was recycled, then it was certification, then carbon footprint. What's the new, anything new coming that we should be getting ahead of?
Well, people always talk about water, the availability of water on the planet. So paper makers that use less water in their process is now becoming a measurable feature that they can promote and let customers know that, you know, the consumption of water is being optimized in the paper making process. So I know water is being considered a lot.
And the mills are constantly looking at ways to economically save money and be more efficient. So the use of chemicals, the use of water, you know, the use of fiber, they try to be more and more efficient, which does help environmentally.
I agree that the water is the new fiber, if you will. Having said that, I'll also appeal to all of you that in your sustainability programs, in your own respective companies, my exposure to the market on sustainability is pretty broad and pretty more deep than you'd expect from a random little New York paper guy. Corporate social responsibility right now is getting as much attention or more attention than just whether or not your fiber is certified. And that goes to your ratios of gender, to race, to all the rest of it, and it should be. And we're back to the humanity piece of what I just talked about here. There's a lot happening, and it goes to the paper world as well. So just keep that in your nugget. And again, press your paper companies. Find out what their sustainability platforms are there, not just in fiber.
In Europe and Asia Pacific, a number of the paper mills are diverting resources and making more packaging materials because that's exploding. Is the same happening here?
Exactly. Yeah, at this point in time, as demand goes down on paper, that's the exact same thing here. They're diversifying to different products. there were more mills that started making book papers because they thought it was the product with greater demand, and now packaging is the it. And there are grades like linerboard where it's actually gone too far. So many have converted to linerboard that we actually have oversupply. But they'll narrow down what grades to make, and I think that's a trend that will continue.
So, yes. And it's fascinating when you look at the progression. So I talked about newspapers, right? Well, newspapers start at, call it 60 brightness. So you really don't have to dye the pulp in order to make a newspaper grade. You just put it right on the paper machine. Well, if you go ahead and bleach that pulp and make it a little bit brighter, and you can slow your machine down a little bit, you can bulk newsprint, you can make a book grade. So the natural progression was that some of the newsprint mills diversified into book manufacturing grades, okay? And so now as this market is right-sizing, they're looking for other things to make. Packaging is an obvious derivative, and it's groundwood based. So that's why I talk about the newsprint mill. The major risk, Jeff talked about some risks out here and what the expectation for 20 is and ahead. The major unpredicted variable risk is which machine's going to close next and what mill's going to close next. And as this market continues to consolidate and demand continues to drop, and it's dropping, another mill is going to close. Another machine's going to convert to packaging. More capacity is going to come out. And we can't predict it, but when it happens, we're going to have another, it's going to be difficult. Paper's going to get tight and the prices are going to go up again. And we're just hoping that it's a little better behavior than it was 2018.
And it's actually healthy to have a mill switch to something like packaging to stay alive rather than have it go away.
That's right.
Guys, what you just said about the industry, the paper industry, book paper specifically, will be taking mills offline, but yet you just said that the growth industry, this is a growing market with 400,000 to 1 million titles new per year. How do you reconcile those two numbers together, and what can publishers here know about, wait a second, we're going to have less paper, but we're having growth? What can publishers learn from that?
That's a brilliant question coming from you. I got to say it, yeah. Because Kent, of course, Kent works for a POD book manufacturer. And that's where the explosive growth is going. There's a lot less waste, which means less consumption, which is great. But title growth is really the growth that we're talking about, right? It's not growth in the number of tons of paper produced for book manufacturing every year. That's down. But as long as there are titles being printed, there's growth. Now, the growth is exciting on the paper front because it's pressing the science of paper manufacturing. Inkjet printing is very different than offset printing. It's very different. It's a lot of water. It's a lot of, and how much, so Dave's talking about, the spread in these books. If this is printed, if you got a big, thick black like that, printed inkjet on the wrong sheet of paper, you'll see it all the way through the backside. It'll offset all over the place. I mean, it's really pressing the science of paper manufacturing, and it's exciting for all of the mills and us. It's a new frontier for paper manufacturing.
And to continue, though, we're comparing this to other industries. The book industry is much healthier than magazine, healthier than newspapers. It's healthier than the retail market for print, as a lot of the advertising now is on the internet. So when you compare it to the markets, the book market is a healthy market, and it's a focus of the mills.
That's right.
But it's also exciting to hear that more people visited libraries than the movie theaters in 2019,
That's right.
so that was good. All right, one more.
Heckler.
You had your Cheerios today.
Yeah, I did. Could you just give, for a dummies version, about the cause and effect, about when one segment gets hit drastic like newsprint, how it affects book groundwood? Just to kind of give it, how does that roll across platforms, and how does it affect our world in the trade book?
Boys?
So it starts with, an overlap of the machines that the grades are made on. So, yeah, as newspapers start disappearing any machines that make a product that you would use, it'll affect it. So as newsprint goes down, that means there's additional availability on that machine for some book grades, as long as it's a mill that can make bulky grades. And with that additional availability, that means pricing-wise, things should not be an issue. And, you know, it can happen in other areas. So let's say on the free sheet side, we had in 2018, 2 coated free sheet mills went out of business. And that affected the coated free sheet side, but they also were lifting the coaters, making uncoated free sheet, and that affected the uncoated side as well, and prices, you know, went up. So it can have an effect from both ways, if machines go out or if, you know, competition goes away. We've seen, you know, in a coated groundwood and SC for years, we've seen where those 2 grades might cannibalize retail business or catalog business. And if one does well, then the other one, there's a lot of availability, and prices go down. So it'll definitely have a ripple effect.
Okay, we have time for one last question if there was one out there. I think, yep, Clark.
You mentioned early on that no new paper mills have opened in this country, and all of the growth is happening overseas. I guess my question is, are they building mills over there that are technologically superior, more efficient, better for the environment, cheaper to operate, et cetera? And are we running a risk here by not innovating and by using the tariff, or is that not really how the mills operate?
We could talk for a long time on that.
Yeah, we could talk for a long time. I'll take it to start.
Yeah.
Yes, they're bigger. Yes, they're faster. Yes, they're more efficient. They're not always more environmentally sound because the fiber that's going to feed them is often being harvested in places that it either shouldn't be or in ways that it shouldn't be. And so it's being called into question around the world. Certain companies have been called into question for that.
And they also may have different fiber. They're not going to have the same type of trees, so that you might not be getting groundwood products. Most of what we see in Asia is free sheet. They also might not make, because of their efficiency and the size of the machines, they're not going to make the different bulks. So it kind of limits what they can do compared to the equipment that certainly is older here. But depending upon the mill, they'll still make investments into it. We did see a period of time, depending upon who owned the mills and how little profitability there was, where maintenance wasn't being done. So we've gone through some tough years in North America in the paper industry, and really new equipment was being put in Europe and in Asia. But, you know, we've also then seen some investments made, and we have some foreign ownership that has been willing to put money into these mills here.
Older machines, right.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was great.
Thank you.